Welcome to Trial by Wine. We take a closer look at crimes that highlight how fascinating humans can be. Schmidty, Swanee and Clarkey visit crimes and run them through their jury of 3, debating both sides of the case to agree an appropriate, if totally fictitious, sentence. Please be advised, Trial by Wine may include explicit or disturbing content and will include drunken rambling. Listener discretion is advised. All right, how are we?
The band's back together. We're very good.
Yes, fantastic. Oh. It's exciting.
I know, it's good to see you.
Good to see your faces.
It is. Yeah.
It's been a while.
It is. I must admit, Clarkey came back and on the Saturday he returned, and I'd seen on Facebook that he was on his way back. And he sends me a text that morning and just says, "Hi, how are you?" And I thought, oh, well, it seems the book is, you know, like when people reach out at work and say, "Oh, can I have a chat?"
And they say nothing. Yeah.
They're going to resign or something. Yeah. And I was like, "Oh, piss off! No way." Anyway, it wasn't that. He was probably just asking how I am because I'd had a broken arm.
No.
Oh, how is it now? I've forgotten about that too.
Correct. Yeah.
A bit on the knobbly side. So not as swollen as it was, but it's got a weird, it's hard to see on the camera, but it's got this weird. I can't
see the light, but it does look a bit bigger than the other one.
I was just saying that lump on Schmidty's arm, if it gets any bigger, it's going to be like that poor bloke that had a penis on his forearm. And so when she goes,
they regrew one.
That was your story.
Sleeve, or she can't light the gas stove anymore because that lump is going to get in the way.
You just need to tuck it into a sleeve. Just need like an elasticated sleeve to sort that out and you'll be fine. You can just loll about inside the elasticated
inside the sleeve.
Pirate blouse.
Have you given it a name?
No, I haven't.
Call it Johnson.
I was trying to say it. Okay, all right. Well, Johnson is a bit upsetting, but, it's not like I'm a hand model or anything. Yeah, no, when the minute I came out of the cast, I thought, that doesn't look right. But
well, I don't know about that.
Oh, that wasn't there before.
Johnson, what are you doing?
The guy...
Whose handiwork is
Bloody
this?
NHS.
Oh, Butterching.
Who do I need to speak to? Yes, Butterching.
Oh, God. The hand therapist thinks it's all tendon damage, so that's why it's swelling. It's inflamed tendons and stuff.
Does it still hurt you?
If I move it the wrong way, it does. And when he's got me doing these, oh, God, that hurts. These little exercises, and that really hurts to do that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's my rehab. Right. And this one, I've got throwing a dart. That's one of my rehabs.
Well, there you go.
Oh.
For our listeners, we were just doing blowjob faces. Sorry.
This is. I'm sure that's what your male physio is saying. This is.
This, yeah, sure,
yeah.
Lollipop, ooh, lolly.
Lucky you're good at acting, or he might have said, "Do you need a prop for that exercise?"
Oh, goodness me. Yes. I suppose we're very excited because we're all back together and
we're a bit giddy.
We're a bit giddy with it, but I suppose we should crack on and introduce ourselves. I'm Schmidty.
I'm Swanee.
And I'm Clarkey. And together we are
Trial by
Wine.
Excellent. And what are we drinking?
Go on, Swanee.
True to form, very imaginatively.
Oh, my God. You literally just went and got a drink and that's what you got.
I know. Sorry, I know it's very disappointing. What are you guys drinking?
I was excited because you were going to get a drink and you came back with that.
It wasn't alcoholic. Sorry. Oh, look, everyone's huffing and very disappointed in me. Hopefully you make it up for me.
At some point when we were unemployed, we decided that what we really needed is a wine fridge. And then we decided we needed to fill it with wine. And there's a winery up the road from us that doesn't have a cellar door. They don't open the cellar door. They just sell directly into restaurants and whatever. Anyway, they have sold. And so the people who owned it decided they needed to sell all of their back vintage. So they had a sale and all of the wines were between 30 and 50% off. So, Schmidty, do you remember the wine I got you for your wedding, for your participation in our wedding? Star Lane?
Yes.
It's a red.
Yes.
They do very, very good reds. So we went and spent $1 squillion filling our wine fridge on their wines that were, 30 to 50% off. And so today we're having a Star Lane Shiraz from 2019, which is the cheapest of the bunch that we got. And it's bloody delicious.
Oh, that's good.
So it looks a little bit like this in case you're ever out and you're looking for that's it.
Very nice.
And they
Good
said to
drop,
us, because
it's
we
that
spent
one.
so much
All
money,
right.
come back in the new year and we'll, they're all good drops. All the reds are good drops. But they said, come back in the new year, we're bottling our Chardonnay and we can get you some of that too. We're like, yeah, can do. See you soon. Wine country is good country. Anyway,
I don't
that's
know how
what
your
we're
livers
drinking.
can
Schmidty,
cope.
what about you?
I am drinking because I was a little bit, let's just say, full when it comes to the alcoholic beverages. Yesterday, I've been a little bit sensitive about things today. So I thought I'd start on a very mild, here's me showing my class, Malibu and Coke.
A very mild Malibu and Coke.
Oh, gosh. You didn't get the Wipeout?
Grant as that.
No, this is the
something a little bit
top
sweet.
shelf
Yeah.
version, remember? But it's very
Oh,
sweet.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Those rich people have been
The billionaire in
rubbing
you,
off on you.
Malibu. You're just throwing money around now, Schmitty.
absolutely right. Yeah. In point of fact, I didn't even pay for this. It was left over from some party.
But that's what happens, right? That's what happens to the rich. They don't even have to pay. Everyone does it for them.
Someone just left it here, and I'm just like, oh, I'll drink that.
Right.
I was going to have a standard pirate juice, and then I thought, I don't know. I think I'll just start with a very sweet Malibu. So a bit weird, but that's what I'm on.
I'm a little bit fragile.
All right. Sorry, I'm about to belch. Get a little bit of post-alcohol reflux.
Oh, a
happening.
little bit of acid
Yep.
they're doing.
Yep.
It's because you're
So
talking
it's-
to poor people.
You need a quick ease.
Yeah, it is. It just
known
upsets me.
It gives me a bit nausea.
As a poor person myself, that is not true. Like, you're all just jealous that I'm just hobnobbing, that's all.
It does feel like an episode of Little Britain or something, doesn't it? Remember one of them vomited all the time? I can't remember. David Williams. What was that?
yes.
I can't remember. I don't remember the setup, but I know he vomited
Was it
a lot.
Anne who used to vomit all the time?
Anne did all the wheeze.
Maybe.
No, I think that was Margaret who did the.
Wasn't Anne
the
the...
post office.
No, was Anne the...
Yeah. Oh, I shouldn't laugh. It's not even that
That's right,
funny, but
yeah.
at the time, oh my God. Oh,
Yeah, I remember,
Imagine all the-
going and seeing Little Britain live, and the person I went with, so there was the woman who vomited all the time, and the person I went with, we drank so much, she ended up vomiting in her cup at her seat.
Well, you've told us
In the middle of
that
the- so bad. So bad.
Oh, my
but so
God.
good.
Little Britain Live,
Anyway.
something that wouldn't happen anymore. Oh my God.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
I
Anyway.
think that I think it speaks volumes that the people that I did used to, I haven't said a lot of it, but I was a big fan of Little Britain in the day. But I still really like, is it Chris Lilly? It's so bad to like him, but I just think
Is
his
it?
stuff is just, apparently he's cancelled.
Yeah, the
he got
Aussie
But
cancelled.
bloke.
Did he?
oh my
Is it
God.
bad?
Yeah, and so occasionally something will pop up. That's him.
Dickie
Yeah,
Dicky's
Jemay,
cancelled.
remember, everything is. But I look back at that Chris Lilly thing and I think it's
Yes.
when he's Mr. G. I fucking
Mr.
love
G
that.
was my favourite. Yeah.
Absolutely. When he's like, it's cracking it.
good.
It's my favourite by far.
Having a
that.
sense of humour is cancelled, basically.
Yes. Mm.
Anywho,
Right.
now I was just going to say, of my Malibu choice, in hindsight, probably I should have gone straight to the pirate juice. For today is a nautical story.
Oh.
Just sit right back and you hear a tale.
Yeah. Oh, will you ever? Okay. So now, as you all know, I have a few secret naughtinesses. One being Josh Gates and his Expedition Unknown series, and the
Secret
other is Naked and
naughtiness,
Afraid,
yes.
of course. Yes.
Yes.
Though in fairness, I haven't watched
the
Naked and
new
Afraid
one.
for ages. I'll get into
Billionaires.
it because that
Billionaire and Afraid.
Naked and Afraid. Well, actually, yes. Maybe not billionaires, but definitely very rich people, right?
Naked billionaires.
No, they're generally
yeah.
not naked. No, they're usually clothed. But yes, with the old Naked and Afraid, it got a bit same. There's only so many hours of watching people wander around inhospitable jungles or deserts, naked and hungry, and forced to eat the least delicious tidbits nature provides. And the roundup on that is find water, build shelter, make fire, suffer for as long as you can, walk a long way to get extracted.
Well, you said there's only so many hours you can spend. How many is that?
Oh, my God, I watched...
At what point was it?
I think I probably watched
like hundreds.
40, 50 hours of it. Might have been.
Yeah,
It was when I
right.
had my hip replaced, so I had plenty of time to be sitting there watching
It's
it.
a lot then.
It was, yeah. But my latest secret naughtiness, discovered when, again, I was still convalescing with my hip, is the Bravo Channel's
Drum roll.
Below Deck franchise.
Oh, dear God.
Oh, dear God. You
what?
judgy McJudgy.
Is that something that's fairly recent, or have you been watching it for some time?
Well, so I
100%.
started watching it with my hip. They're up
Isn't
to,
that-
for the
isn't that
Mediterranean one,
Naked
I
and
think they're on
Afraid on a
season
boat?
11, so it's been running, well, less of the naked, not so much afraid. I'll get onto it. I'll explain it.
It's
all right?
assholes on a boat being looked after by a crew, isn't it, essentially? From what I
Not
said.
always arseholes. Sometimes they're lovely, just like Zach.
I've never seen an
Sometimes they're
episode.
lovely.
I always think they're people who are trying really hard. They've been asked, they've got some kind of comp deal to go on it. Yeah, they've got to behave.
I will tell you that the guests who actually have some money,
Oh, totally. I know what you're going to say here before you
they're
start.
nice.
Correct.
They're all
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
They're people who actually have
It's
money.
the staff.
It's the ones that that's
the
a whole
friends of
different
the
story.
rich
But when it
people.
comes to the when
Correct.
it comes to
They
the rich
behave
people,
Yep.
it's the not or even some of
Yes.
them, like they had a charter in, I can't remember which series because I've watched
I've
a
only
lot
ever
of
seen
this.
the ones where they're in the Caribbean or something. I don't think I've ever seen a Mediterranean one.
Well, there was one I was watching, I think it might have been Down Under, and they had these
God.
they had influencers, right? Social media influencers.
Yeah.
It was all taking photos of themselves and being wankers. But the worst part about it was they were pretty offensive, but I think they actually left a really shitty tip as well. Like the tips are usually between $16,000 and $25,000 US, and these guys left some tiny tip. And in earlier,
That all? That's so shitty.
well, it is because it's divided by the crew, right? Which is usually about 9 people. So, and I don't think they get a huge salary to be on these charters in the first place, and it's prorated. So the tip is everything, and they work really hard to get the tip. And when you've got really demanding, nasty customers, and then they just give you a shit tip, it's like, but I laughed because the chef at the time, he was like, seriously, you can make money just taking photos and putting them on Instagram? Like, that's amazing. And then when the tip came out, he goes, clearly not that much money, hey. And I was
Correct.
like, oh, right, okay. Cutness.
Yes.
So for you, Clarky, because I know you don't watch anything in the reality genre.
A realm.
Below Deck is a docuseries, sort of, that follows the trials and tribulations of the staff aboard luxury super yachts. A career that, if I had known about it 30 years ago, I reckon I'd have given it a red-hot crack.
Really?
Absolutely. I'm far too old for it now, but I look at it, I think I would have been bloody good at that. There are 4 departments pretty much on a super yacht. There's the captain, who's pretty much the managing director of the boat. They ensure, that the boat doesn't sink, sail around a bit, and sometimes schmooze with the guests. But their main role is to manage the staff. And
The
some of
Costa
them do it
Concordia
more
would
than
have a
others, and some
different
of
view
them
on
do
the
it.
role of a captain.
True.
I'm so impressed you remember the name of that.
Oh, yeah. Well, how could you forget it? Isn't
don't know.
Isn't it the captain who got off before all the
That's the one. Yeah. I'm out of here. Thanks.
He crashed it and then he got off.
He crashed
See
it
ya.
and then he
Left it.
said, shit,
Yeah.
this isn't good. I'm out of here. Yeah. So there's the interior, which is managed by a chief steward, and they look after everything inside the boat. So the guest cabins, the toilets, table settings and service, guest entertainment at night, usually beach picnics, all that sort of stuff. They are housekeeping and event managers and usually have 2 stewards under them who invariably fight with one another, or they hate the chief and spend all their time bitching.
Is the interior one the one who looks after the bloke that on our cruise that drank so much, had a fight with his wife, got locked out of the room and was literally sitting on the floor at the front of his door with food and drink scraps left around him, completely passed out in the doorway like this?
Crying.
Is that interior?
Yes.
That would look after that?
Interior would be managing that. Yes, no, Interior would deal with that. Although on the cruise of the size you're
What a
talking about,
terrible
obviously
job.
there's a much larger interior team. Yeah. But I've met plenty of people on those cruises who are working them who go from one boat to another, and it's a career and they love it. But this is a much smaller, we're talking much smaller. So whilst they're super yachts, they're usually, I think, about 100 anything from about 55 metres to maybe 100 metres. They have a crew of usually about 9 people on board, and they're usually only catering to about 8 customers at a time on a charter. So it's much more discreet than a massive cruise. Yep. So then there's the deck team, which is led by a bosun or a first officer. They're responsible for endless cleaning of the teak floors, stainless steel railings, windows, spa. And all they do is clean, right? Constantly. They also set up the water toys, which is managing manage the docking process with fenders and heaving and hauling the ropes. Unloading and loading guest baggage and maintaining the tenders, and they help a little bit with the interior on occasion. The water toys are things like the slides, and if you've ever watched it, If you're out
course
there
they are.
somewhere,
No, that
Captain
makes
Sandy,
sense now.
stop making people deal with the goddamn slide. It is a waste of everyone's time. I don't care that the guests really expect it or like it. You're actually causing injuries. It's a work health safety issue. Cut it out, Sandy. Anyway.
Is this Schmidty's occupational violence training coming to the front, Swanee?
Not my favourite captain, FYI.
I think I only know. Quite possibly.
Sometimes I think
I've ever
management training. I tell you.
I think I've only ever seen Captain Sandy in the ones that I've seen, but mine are probably a bit older that I've watched.
That might be why you don't like watching it.
Have you watched it too?
Just saying.
I've seen it. Yeah, I don't watch it, but I've seen it.
I've gone through a few captains now. Captain Lee, who's now retired.
The only people I've ever seen are like groups of people who have come from, no offense to Jersey, but they're like from Jersey, and then they're
That's very
bit trashy and very. Is it? Well, I've only seen the Caribbean.
Yeah.
No, I've only seen in the Caribbean. The ones that I've seen, I think they're so old.
Is that the OG? That's the
Probably,
original.
yeah. It would certainly be close to it because I'm aware that there are other ones that I've never seen it. But the ones that I watched, the people
that would have been Captain
really
Lee. That would have been like
he's got a grey beard.
White beard, yeah. White beard, white hair.
Oh, that's him. That's what I'm thinking of.
If you keep this up, I'm going to chew your ass. And everyone's like, I don't think
that's him.
What
that's one I've seen.
Are you still
saying
speaking English?
Things, Captain Lee. Well, he thinks he's abusing people, but he's actually making comments
sexual,
that are not quite right, and they sound a bit sexual. And he doesn't do it on purpose at all. Anyway, so the fourth is the galley after the deck at the interior. It's usually one chef responsible for all charter meals and crew meals.
Oh, we like the galley.
Yeah, but personally I think the chef has the hardest role as they're cooking basically from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. and the tips are largely driven by the dining experience.
No, what I mean is we like them because they fill our belly.
We love them. Some of them are
so he gets
but we love them.
Tips and then has to share them.
He or she, yes. They work very hard and it's just them, point. Right? So if they fall over, if they break their back, there's no one else to do it. That's a very tough job. And sometimes I'm not sure that the other crew truly appreciate the pressure that the chef is under. Yeah. Anyway, just saying, as an observer of the programs.
Horrible.
Oh, my God. And some of these chefs are so impressive. Well, in fact, almost all of them, they might be nightmares in the actual galley to the crew, but when you see what they turn out, my giddy aunt, the number of times I sit there thinking, I want to eat that. Why am I not there? It looks so great.
Yeah.
Okay, so
because it would have to be
Below Deck
star food too, wouldn't it?
That's right. I get onto this thing about 5-star a little bit later and my opinion on what really is 5-star, but the food certainly usually is, yes. I'm not sure that some of the other elements of the service is, but that is. Now, I started with Below Deck Mediterranean and then Down Under, but lately I've gotten into a spin-off which is Below Deck Sailing Yacht. Unlike the other franchises, that have powered boats with very fancy bridges that feature flat screens for radar, depth finders and GPS navigation. Of course you haven't. You never watch this sort of television.
True.
The sailing yacht boat is the Parsifal 3, and it's a proper sailboat which adds complexity to the deck team's work as they have to understand the rigging and the impact of wind and weather conditions in terms of using it. So as a means to propel the boat. Oh, well, all the others the other super yachts are powered. It's like going out in a giant black and white.
Understand. Yes.
They actually sail.
Yes, understand.
Yeah. It also creates havoc for the interior and galley, as when the boat is tacking, anything not stowed away is likely to smash, and serving clients when under sail is much more difficult. Imagine the floor you're serving margaritas on is tipping at a 20-degree angle.
Yes.
The Parsifal 3 is a 54-metre, 460 gross ton yacht, which accommodates 12 guests and 9 crew. And on the Parsifal, there is an engineering department. It's just one guy, but he's sort of part of the cast on that particular franchise. But generally, the engineers are these sort of grumpy-looking old European guys who stay downstairs and they're never on camera unless something goes terribly wrong because they're not kind of featured as the cast, because I'm guessing they don't fit the type that they go for the cast, i.e. young and horny. Okay. Obviously, alert on that. The things that make these programs interesting to watch are the relationships between the crew. As I said, usually young, under 35, and in it for the tips and party lifestyle. When they're not on charter, of course. It's a powder keg setup with 9 people working at close quarters, living together 24/7 for about 2 months, I think, is the season. And there's usually bitch fights, factions, love interests, and alcohol-driven bad decisions. And as I said, I've been watching the sailing one lately.
Sounds like a Saturday night.
Yeah, it is, which made me think more about the story I'm telling today. But first, my sources. Wikipedia, Time Magazine, AmericanMuseum.com, TheFamilyNation.com, HistoryDaily.org, AllThat'sInteresting.com, 9Honey, Mamma Mia, CBS News, and the Reader's Digest book, and a book called Alone by Richard Logan and Terry Fassbender. So, today's story is set on a sailing yacht.
I was hoping if it was going to be a boat related at this point.
Yes. Now, the yacht in question in this story is a little bit smaller than the Parsifal 3. It was 18 metres long, so about a third the size of the Parsifal, and 3 metres longer than my houseboat to sort of give you some kind of sense of size. Still a sizable sailboat, and probably not one you'd consider like a trailer boat. So it's just a little bit too big to be putting it on a trailer. As it turns out, the story isn't really about the ketch. Like Below Deck Sailing Yacht, the boat is simply a glamorous backdrop for the machinations of the people on board.
Oh.
So let's talk about the people.
Ooh.
It starts with Arthur Duperrault. Arthur was born in 1921 and grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. A slight young man, Arthur hit the gym to bulk up in order to join the Navy.
Hang on, what year are we in then?
Well, right now we're about to go into 1942, but he was the action takes place in 1961, but we are not in 1961 yet.
Right, okay.
So Arthur bulked up so that he could join the Navy in 1942 and served in Southeast Asia as a medic. Whilst he traipsed the jungles of Burma, now Myanmar, and witnessed the horrors of war, he gained a love of the sea on his voyages with the Navy. Leaving the Navy in 1945, Arthur went home to Wisconsin with his wife, Jean, who he had met whilst working for the Pentagon in Washington. Jean had been a secretary at the FBI, and they had married in 1944. By 1947, Jean and Arthur had a little boy, Brian, and were living with Arthur's parents in Duperrault, Wisconsin. Arthur studied optometry in Chicago and graduated in 1949 and then set up his own optometrist practice in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The following year, Jean and Arthur welcomed their second child, Terry Jo, and Arthur continued to build his practice, finding success in selling contact lenses, which were the new big thing at the time.
I bet.
And in 1954, Arthur and Jean welcomed their third child, Renee. Both Arthur and Jean were active in their community and well respected and liked. Arthur had a brush with fame when he spent hours digging the family collie out of a pit that it had fallen into, and on another occasion he saved a child from drowning. He also continued his love of sailing, competing in ice sailing, which looks really bloody dangerous. It's like a little single...
Ice sailing.
It's like a very, almost like a kayak with a sail on it, and it's got like a catamaran steering thing, and it's on blades, and you're actually sailing, as in being propelled by wind,
sailing.
but on ice. Yeah, ice sailing. Yeah,
What?
it looks, and they get to massive
go wrong?
speeds. Like it's really. Exactly right. But he did also sail on water that wasn't frozen with some friends of his who owned bigger vessels as the sea had made its way into his blood. And he's from Wisconsin. Originally, Wisconsin's pretty much landlocked. They've got the Great Lakes up there. It's very cold in the winter, but he loved the sea and he loved sailing. But, you can't
I'm on maps.
Can't do that
I couldn't
too
help
easily
myself.
when you're up there.
You are, of course you are.
It's right there on Lake
I'd
Michigan.
expect nothing less.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know. Oh, you'd accept. I had to find. So Green Bay is this little it's a little bay that comes off Lake Michigan. So
Yeah.
it would be. They're the Great Lakes, aren't they? So
Yeah.
that would. Yeah. So very central US, but I didn't know where Wisconsin was.
Midwest, isn't it?
That panicked me. Correct. High, like lakes, like not.
High up,
So
yeah.
you've got
Near
above it will be
Minnesota.
lake, and
It's
then
Minnesota.
correct, and above it will be lake, and then above it Canada. Yeah. So very cold, very
cold,
central.
yeah. So Arthur was also a very involved father with his children. The kids had recollections of him, like he'd patch them up when they injured themselves. He wasn't the kind of dad who was just working all the time and not involved with anything, but he was working very hard to get his business up and running because, he didn't necessarily come from a great deal of wealth, but he was definitely building up a very successful optometry business. But, he'd been doing that for about 10 years and he started to be concerned that he wasn't spending enough time with his kids, right? And I think he was a bit worried about as they were getting older that you hit the tipping point where if you're not going to spend the time with them now, they'll grow up, they'll move on, and they'll do their own thing, and you kind of miss out on them. So he decided a good way to combine his love of sailing and spend more time with his family would be to take some time out from his business, sign the kids out of school, and take them on a sailing adventure down south. Wisconsin, as I said, landlocked and cold, so a summer sailing adventure had huge appeal for the family. They had all been on sailboats, but not for any extended period of time, and they decided to do a taster trip first to see how they would get on together in a confined boat, because it's quite different, the romantic ideal of being on a boat with all your family and then the reality of it. No, well, it's just quite sensible. They said, look, we'll take some time out, with the view to extend it to a year. I think what he wanted to do was actually almost sail to Asia, because that's what he'd done in the Navy when he was young, and he really loved it.
Yep.
But we'll start with a small taster type trip. And the idea was to go down to Florida and charter a boat and do a bit of sailing in the Bahamas. So they pack up the car and a bit of a small trailer and they head on down to Florida, which, frankly must have taken a bloody long time in 1961. So as I said, they went out to Fort Lauderdale. Yeah, to get themselves a boat. Now, at the same time as the Duperraults were planning their family sailing adventure, Julian Harvey was signing on as the captain of the Bluebelle, which is an 18-metre ketch in Fort Lauderdale. Julian Harvey was a bona fide hero. He had had a distinguished career in the Air Force, flying fighter planes in the Second World War and the Korean War. By all accounts, Julian was a charismatic and good-looking guy who was into pumping iron and keeping fit, well before it became trendy. He had a bit of a stammer and, from what I understand, a wonky eye. But these things seemed to make him more relatable to people, and he was pretty well liked. And he was certainly well liked by the ladies.
Oh.
Because he'd been married quite a few times. At the time of his being hired to captain the Bluebelle, he was on his 6th marriage at the ripe old age. I think he was 44. I think he was 44 at this point, yeah.
Jeepers.
Up to wife 6, yep. And her name was Mary Dean or Deanie, I'm not sure.
He was liked by the ladies for 3 months.
No, I think he was the one who was like,
he left them.
Thanks for that, next.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So Deanie had been a flight attendant for TWA and they'd been married for 4 months. She was also employed by the boat's owner to act as chef and chief stewardess when the boat was chartered. So she was taken on the shitty job in the galley of cooking all the time, as well as cleaning the heads, cleaning the cabins. Not that it's a much smaller boat, but there's still some work to be done here, and entertaining the guests. The Bluebelle was about a third the size of the Parsifal, so its accommodations were not as salubrious, but it did have provision to sleep 5 charter guests and 2 crew. The crew cabin was at the front of the boat.
Hang on, five guests?
And 2 crew.
And 2 crew. And does that include him?
Yeah, he's the crew. The captain and his wife are the crew.
And her. Right,
and
got
the family of 5 being the Duperraults. It's a perfect fit, really, this boat. So the very front of the boat, you had the crew cabin, and it went sort of in a shape of a V, so it was, and it berthed, I think, 2 people, and it was actually separated from the rest of the boat because it was forward of the mast.
Right.
And so it was actually like, I think you went around the side to get into it. You couldn't get right through from inside. And that's kind of why it was the crew one, because they were sort of had their privacy in there. The master cabin was in the middle of the boat and accommodated 2 adults. There was a galley and dining area that converted into a sleeping berth at night and a further 3/4 berth at the stern of the boat on the starboard side. I think it was the starboard side. So the back of the boat, you got the engine room on one side and you got this smaller cabin. In the middle of the boat, you've got a galley, like a caravan bit, like where it converts the dining area of a caravan, turns into a double bed at night. And then further in, you've got a master cabin, which I think was queen or double bed with a bit of storage and a table.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, there aren't many pictures of the Bluebelle, so I have been working off written descriptions, but I'm pretty sure that the way I described that was right. The only bit I'm a little unclear on is that galley area, as you went upstairs, so you could go into the 3/4 into the engine room, but if you went upstairs, you went into an area called the cockpit. And the cockpit is really the above, on top of the deck.
Above deck.
No, it's above deck and it's where they steer. So the steering wheel would be behind
pit, is it?
Where people were sitting around in the cockpit. So it's a bit above deck. Anyway, it was a perfect size for the family of 5, particularly 3 small children. And when the Duperraults arrived in Fort Lauderdale, they chartered the boat for a week's sailing as their test run. I also read in several accounts, but I couldn't find any evidence of this being true, that Arthur and Julian had been previously acquainted or they were friends. But I really don't know if that is the case, because I think people have just drawn a bit of a bow because they were both ex-military.
Yeah.
I couldn't see anything that they were mates. On the 8th of November 1961, the Duperraults boarded the Bluebelle with the Harveys, loading the kids and their gear, including Brian's .22 caliber rifle, on board, with the plan to sail to the Bahamas. Brian's the oldest boy.
Oh, right. I was just looking at my notes going, oh, right, so he's the boy.
Brian's the oldest boy. Yeah, he's about 14, I think. They were starting with the island of
Yeah, I always insist my kids bring their rifles when we go on holidays. Be armed, boys.
Of the time.
Yeah.
And then to Sandy Point, a village on the southwest edge of Great Abaco Island. Now, when asked why he took the rifle, Brian declared it was to shoot sharks. And in case you think that's weird, Swanee, it did remind me of standing on the roof of the houseboat with Wu and Captain Schmidty whilst the Cap shot at the carp with our .22.
Shooting carp.
Back in the olden days.
Exactly
That's
right.
Boom.
Now, the family did have a really lovely time. They were snorkeling, collecting shells, hanging out on idyllic beaches. At the same time, Deanie wrote to her mother complaining about how much work she had as a chef in a stew, and not a single minute to herself. Very like all the chief stews I've observed on Below Deck. Shout out to Hannah, Kate Chastain, Daisy, Bugsy and Aisha. It's a lot harder than it looks. Early Sunday, they stopped by the office of Sandy Point Village Commissioner Roderick W. Pinder to fill out the forms for leaving the Bahamas and returning to the United States. This has been a once-in-a-lifetime vacation, Arthur told Pinder. We'll be back before Christmas. That night, Deanie Harvey prepared a dinner of chicken cacciatore and salad. Now, I don't mean to be too critical of Deanie, but that meal would not have cut it on the Below Deck yacht. Captain Sandy would have been all up in her grill about it not being 5-star, and sometimes she says 7-star quality. Seriously, they hire 20-somethings with minimal experience,
7-star.
I know exactly, to crew multi-million-dollar boats and call it 5-star service. It's good, don't get me wrong, but when you see them Febrezing the pillows, it does make you wonder. Anyway, around
Febrezing
12:35 p.m. they do, right?
no.
And they Febreze the pillows. I'm like, what is that? And why are you showing me that? Like, seriously.
What is that?
To charter, I looked up, to charter the Parsifal 3, it cost €245,000. And that's for, I think, a 2 or 3 day charter. And you get Febrezed pillows? Anyway.
No thanks.
What?
Around
What would you be
12
expecting in that place? I'm confused.
Fresh linen, just freshly cleaned and
Fresh
laundered
linen.
linen.
But they can't
Yeah,
on
like-
a. You know,
They do. They constantly
Not
do.
every day,
though. They do. There is a steward in laundry non-stop.
Fair enough. I don't
almost
disagree with
can't
that, yeah.
believe how much laundry they do, right?
Yeah.
The poor person is just there washing and drying and folding.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Around 12:35, not even every day, just like start with fresh linen, but the Febrezing just feels a little, I don't know, crap. Around 12, use something else. Don't use Febreze.
Like a linen spray. I get it. What you're
Use
saying.
a nice linen spray.
I thought
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I was just wanting to know if that's what you meant. Yes, I'm with
If
you.
you have to spray it, use a linen spray, not bloody Febreze, right? $5.50 at Coles. At around 12:35 on Monday, November the 13th, a crew member. Now this is important.
Hang on. Which date were we?
So we are now. So on Sunday night we had the chicken cacciatore.
Yep.
And salad. So that's a Sunday. So this
Yep.
is 12:35 on Monday,
Morning.
November the 13th. So afternoon, noon.
Oh, sorry, 12 afternoon. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
So a crew member on the oil tanker Gulf Lion spotted a man waving from a dinghy. He was shouting, "Help! I'm Julian Harvey, the master of the Bluebelle. I have a dead baby on board."
What?
So
How
they
old was
pulled him-
Renee? She wasn't a baby, was she?
Oh, she was 7, I think.
She wasn't a baby. Right, okay.
She wasn't a baby, but he
Just
called her a
checking,
baby. But yeah.
Oh, was he referring to her?
So she's
Oh,
dead.
oh.
Yeah, no,
Oh.
they pulled him. They pulled him aboard the oil tanker,
Gosh.
as well as the very sadly lifeless body of Renee, the youngest of the Duperraults.
She was with him. Okay.
Julian told the crew that at about 8:30 the previous night, so the Sunday night, chicken cacciatore night, the boat was hit by a sudden squall, which made the boat keel over and snap the mast. He said everyone had been hanging out in the cockpit, so that open bit I was talking about, And it was a lovely night and everyone was having a nice time. The kids were having a little nap and everything was good. When suddenly this wind came out of nowhere and caused the mast to break and fall directly down and through the hull. And it damaged fuel lines on the way. So it fell straight down, smashed through the hull and damaged some fuel lines. It also brought down the mizzen and probably the mainsail. And so there was rigging and cables and sails on people. There was talk about splinters that had injured Arthur and Denny. He just said to everyone, calm down. He was trying to get some cable cutters to get through the fallen rigging to try and make things all right. But then a fire broke out from the broken gas lines. And in one version of the story, he said that he saw the adults jump overboard, basically, and Arthur had been steering the boat at this time. He had the engine going because he was trying to stop it from sinking directly because through movement, it's not just going to fill up immediately. So, and he had the bilge pumps going.
Captain?
Yeah, Arthur was an experienced sailor, so it's not unreasonable to say here, well, there's this emergency, you steer the boat while I do these things. And so he was sort of doing that, but then he said he saw in the end Arthur jump off the back of the boat towards the others, and he thought that they'd got the life rings, the life preservers, and the kids were all in life jackets. That's what he thought he saw. And then he jumped off the boat himself because he realised he was separated from the rest of them by the fire. He couldn't do anything. He jumped in the water, he got into the dinghy, and unfortunately later he saw the body of Renee floating past, and so he pulled her aboard the life raft and tried to resuscitate her, but it was too late.
Gosh, how terrible for him.
It was shocking, wasn't it? It was exactly. And understandably, the crew of the Gulf Line were very sorry for him. And they organised him to be transferred to Nassau for questioning. While some people were not quite sure about his version of events, with no survivors or other witnesses, they let him return to Miami. And I believe some of the crew of the Gulf Line and others actually did a bit of a hand around and got some money for him so that he could fly back because he had nothing. Everything had gone down with the Bluebelle, including his wife. But let's not forget. Yeah. And he did have to attend a further hearing in Miami with the Coast Guard, which I'm not surprised at. I think that's pretty much process given his wife and the Duperrault family were missing, presumed dead. So it was during this hearing on November 16, so only 3 days later, Swanee.
Yep.
Back in the Bahamas, though, that a miracle was taking place.
No way.
The second officer of the Greek freighter, Captain Theo, Nicholas Spakadakis, noticed a small white object bobbing about in the distance. It looked very like a whitecap, but as it wasn't quite behaving like a wave, so when a whitecap comes over and crashes and then it sort of disappears and the next one. This sort of was still there all the time. Yeah.
Upon closer inspection, it revealed itself as the truth.
At first he thought it might be a fisherman, but it was miles too far out for a fisherman to be there. And so he said to the captain, hey, look, there's a thing over there. And the captain changed course to intercept whatever this thing was. Imagine their surprise when they realised it was an oblong raft with a little blonde girl wearing a white blouse and pink corduroy pants.
No.
The freighter lowered a raft and a crew member to move her into it because there were actually sharks circling around, and so they're like, don't get in the water.
Oh, my God.
Don't get in the water, and so they got her into the raft. She was then taken on board and put in a cabin whilst they contacted the Coast Guard. She was given water and orange juice as she was terribly dehydrated. Unable to speak much, and she was in and out of consciousness, she pretty much just said the word Bluebelle and identified that she was Terry Jo Duperrault, and then she passed out. Terry Jo was airlifted to Miami Hospital to undergo treatment for severe dehydration, sunburn and exposure. Now, as I mentioned earlier about Naked and Afraid, you can live for 21 days. So in Naked and Afraid, my other secret naughtiness, it's a 21-day challenge because you can actually go without food for 21 days and not die, but you can only go without water for 3 days.
Yeah.
Apparently, well, I can't. I would kill someone before I. But
that's on TV. That's not real.
You can. And it was not good for you, but you can. So she had been out there for nearly 4 days at this point. And so she was literally on the brink of death. 11. She was literally on the brink of death. So she'd been floating around 84 hours, just over 3 days, nearly 4 days. The lack of water had taken a serious toll on her body. But back in Miami, where we were having this hearing, news came in that Terry Jo had been found alive. And when Julian heard this, he stammered, "Oh, my God. Why, that's
It's a miracle."
wonderful." Yeah.
Yes.
Now, at this point in the hearing, he'd given his testimony and other people were now giving theirs. So he'd done his bit, but he'd been told, "You can stay if you want. It's your right to listen to everything." And he was happy to stay and listen. But when he heard about Terry Joe, he just excused himself, saying he was really tired and he wanted to go speak to his family. So he left. Apparently one of the investigators, because as I said, they weren't really buying his story. And there's a whole raft of, no pun intended, detail about why it was a bit off. Least of all, the mast going straight through the boat like that. Because if the boat was keeling in the way he suggested, the mast would have fallen down at an angle. It wouldn't
On
have
an
gone
angle.
through the hull the way he was saying. Yeah, it was like that was really quite odd. Also, he didn't use flares. There's a whole bunch of other things. And lo and behold, the dinghy that he was in was fully stocked. So, he was relatively prepared. They didn't really believe him totally, but they didn't have any evidence otherwise. But someone did actually ask for police or security to be put onto Terry Joe at the hospital after he left the inquiry because they thought maybe Julian was dodgy. And when he left, they thought, we don't want him going over to the hospital, and doing the wrong thing. The concern for Terry Joe's safety was not necessary, as it turns out. Rather than head to the hospital in a made-for-TV movie pilot twist, Julian went to a motel not far away. He checked into the Sandman Hotel under a fake name, John Munro, and paid cash for his room. Whilst there, he wrote a 2-page note to his friend, whose name is literally Jim Boozer, and pinned $10 to the pillow of his bed.
And what? Pinned $10?
He put $10 to the pillow of his bed for a reason.
Is it Febreze
Around 2 hours.
pillow?
I think it's for bleach.
Oh.
Around 2 hours later, a maid, who was basically the junior stew in this story, went to the room to do a turn down and couldn't get into the bathroom, mostly because Julian's body was wedging the door shut. Once the police opened the door, they found Julian deceased. He had died by suicide by slashing his thigh, ankles and jugular vein. He actually went to town on himself a bit.
Oh, God.
The thigh cut was to the bone, and he weirdly smeared his blood on the walls, and the cuts on him were repeated and deep slashes, which did initially have the cops wondering if it was a murder being staged as a suicide.
Whoa.
It was that violent on himself. So whilst the note itself, the 2-page note, gave no explanation as to what happened, it did say, "I'm a nervous wreck and just can't continue. I'm going out now. I guess I either don't like life or I don't know what to do with it," and then it ended with the words, "I got too tired and nervous. I couldn't stand it any longer."
What?
The note also requested Mr. Boozer take care of his 14-year-old son, Lance, and that he was to be buried at sea. His friends said, mainly Mr. Boozer, said the loss of the Bluebelle, his wife, and the Duperrault family was just the final straw for Julian. Julian had also lost one of his earlier wives in an accident many years earlier.
What a coincidence.
And had struggled with injuries sustained in the wars. And he did actually have a couple of serious injuries due to his rather risky job as a fighter pilot. He lost 2 yachts in the past as well. When I say lost, I don't mean misplaced. Unfortunately, sunk one when it ran up against a sunken ship. He accidentally bashed one of his, a shipwreck. He bashed one of his fancy yachts into a shipwreck, which was a shit. And then I can't remember what that was. It had a funny name. I'll come onto it. It's there somewhere. And the Valiant was the second
Costa
boat
Concordia.
that I think caught fire. It wasn't the Costa Concordia. It was a name that I don't know why you would call a boat this. And it was something or other. It finishes with albatross. I mean, why would you? The torbatross, which is like an albatross. It's probably just another form of bird. But, with all the superstitions about albatrosses, I don't think I would be using atross in any boat name.
No.
Oh, I forgot to mention this earlier, but the Bluebelle had originally been called the Lady Jane. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the superstitions,
change the boat's name.
That's right.
Oh, I've forgotten about that, yeah.
Yeah, you can't change a boat's name. Any sailor will tell you that's very unlucky.
Cannot.
Yep.
So I don't know whether his other boats had ever changed their names, but he was a very unlucky guy who had just taken as many knocks from life as he was able to, and that's why he just decided to get out. Meanwhile, Terry Joe is in hospital, and she's not talking about what happened. She's just trying to get better. She did receive incredible care from the staff, and there was a huge amount of media attention about this poor little girl found floating around in the sea, and the media at the time dubbed her the sea waif. They wanted to get in and
God.
see her, and she was very protected by the staff. Like, no one would let the reporters come and see her. They sort of suggested, or the doctors sort of thought maybe she was in shock and she didn't really understand what had happened.
Right.
She totally understood what had happened.
Oh.
Hence, she didn't trust anyone, didn't want to talk.
Wasn't ready to, I don't think. But by November 20th, so 7 days later, Terry Jo was well enough to talk to the investigators about what had happened on the Bluebelle. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen the film Dead Calm.
Yes.
Yes.
So cue Billy Zane now to play the part of Julian Harvey in a weird kind of reboot of Dead Calm, right?
Was that with Nicole Kidman? Was she the other one in
Yes,
this?
yes.
Yeah,
Did she have a fake nose?
No, not fake nose.
No, that's the other one, the Hours. As Terry tells the story, late on November 12th, the Bluebelle began its return journey to Fort Lauderdale. So they'd gone out, they'd had the lovely time in the Bahamas, the islands, and now they were coming back. At around 9 p.m., so about half an hour from when he said, Terry Jo had entered the lower cabin to sleep, leaving her parents and siblings, Julian and his wife, on deck. Later that evening, she was awakened by the sound of her brother screaming and calling for his father to help him, and heavy footfalls, which she decided to investigate. Above deck, she observed the bodies of her brother and mother in the main cabin, not far from the galley, lying in a pool of blood. And she said, she knew instantly they were dead. Walking further into the deck, Terry Jo then observed Julian carrying something that could have been a bucket, not really sure. He then slapped her across the face and shoved her back below deck, shouting, "Get back down there." And, of course, she's an 11-year-old girl. She's just seen what looks like some of her family dead. There's no sign of where her father is or Renee, and this man has just belted her and sent her downstairs. So she did as she was told. She went back into her cabin and I think probably just cowered there for about 10, 15 minutes until oil and water started to gush over the cabin floor. At that point, Julian appeared at the cabin door with what she thought was her brother's rifle in his hand. And apparently they looked at each other and then he just sort of went back up on deck. When she tells this later, it's like that was a moment where she thought he was going to shoot her. And then for whatever reason, he just walked off.
He's obviously thought the boat will take her.
Yeah, I reckon. But there's a few moments in this where it could have gone another way. She had then heard what hammering sounds, which I think she thought at the time was the engine, but later she thought, no, I think it's the sound of the dinghy hitting the side of the boat, because it's bashing into it. As the water was rising, Terry Jo made her way up on deck, freaking out at the idea she might run into the floating dead body of her mother or brother. Did I mention Dead Calm? I don't know if you remember that bit, but there's a bit where Sam Neill goes down into the boat. Quick recap from my memory, Billy Zane's on a boat that's sinking. Nicole Kidman and Sam Neill come along to help him. He, I think, knocks Sam Neill out, leaves him on the boat that's sinking, and he steals their boat with Nicole on it. So while Sam Neill's trying to get the other boat going so he can rescue his wife, at one point he opens up a saloon, basically, the saloon downstairs, and it's full of water and there's all these dead bodies floating in there. It's something that has never, ever got out of my mind. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So she was a bit freaked out about having that experience. Unfortunately, she didn't. Julian saw her on the deck and asked her if the dinghy was loose, and she said, I don't know. He got her to hold the dinghy rope while he went to get something. She just let go of the rope, and, of course, he saw that the dinghy was going to float off, so he jumped overboard, swam to the dinghy, which was also dragging the boat's life raft, which basically left Terry Jo alone on the deck of a fast-sinking boat.
And she didn't know where Renee was at that point? Or
her dad. Or Denny.
Or Denny.
The only two people that she was aware of where they were the brother and her mum.
That's Jean and Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Now, at this point, and I can't believe this, I believe it, but I just think sometimes it's just incredible the things that are clear in people's heads. I don't know that in her situation I would have thought to do this, but she remembers the small oblong cork float which was lashed to the deck, which is basically another one of these lifesaver type things, but it's oblong shape. So she untied it, threw it overboard and jumped in, swam over to it, and that was what she was found on, this float. The float was so small that she had to sit upright in it to avoid falling into the water. 3.5 days she had to sit up. There really wasn't anything separating her from the sea, as it was basically just this life ring with a bit of a net under it. So it's a bit like, a pool toy, really, in some ways. So she floats around with no water. She's being nibbled on by parrotfish. She was followed at one point by some porpoises, which made her feel a little bit better because, they made her feel safer. She had a few hallucinations as things got bad, where she imagined that it was something along the lines of her father was... They were getting on a plane and her father's like, come on, Terry Jo, we've got to go. And he gave her a glass of wine, and she'd never drunk wine before, but she remembered it being refreshing and sweet. And then, of course, she woke up. I think on the second day there was a plane flying over her, and so she's madly she took off her blouse and she's trying to get their attention. It actually circled her and she thought maybe they'd seen her, but unfortunately they hadn't. She also reported that she was aware of boats going past her, like, a K or so away, like big steamer boats and tankers and stuff.
Yeah.
She saw their lights and that, but no one had seen her. She's this tiny little speck on the sea. She was adamant that the mast of the Bluebelle was intact. There had been no fire aboard the vessel, and the sea was calm throughout the entirety of the events prior to the sinking. So after they've got this statement from her, she's then told that Julian was picked up alive 3 days before her in a life raft, alongside her dead sister's body, and the bodies of her parents, her brother, and Mary Denny had all been lost to sea. When she first was found, she said the word Bluebelle. Mm-hmm. She was also gesticulating, and she went like this. She said Bluebelle, and they knew that the Bluebelle had sunk because Julian Harvey had told them. But she was saying, basically it's gone down and I'm Terry Jo, and that was it. She did know what had happened. Like, she was quite aware that the boat had gone down. With Terry Jo's testimony, Julian's life came under the microscope. At the time of the drowning of the second wife, now this is a weird name. Her name is spelt like Joanne without an E, but I've also seen it written Joan. Second wife, Joanne Harvey. So they were looking at that. The Florida police and the diver who inspected the sunken wreck of the 1946 Plymouth and Joan's father all wondered how he could have escaped it. So the story of that is he's driving along with his mother-in-law and Joan, and they went to the movies, and they're on their way back from the movies, and they're going over this little wooden bridge, and the car just for no apparent reason veers to the right, and he steers it hard to the left, and then they go over the bridge and they land in the bayou. And according to him, he was able to miraculously jump out of the car as it was falling off the bridge. And so he's unharmed. Sense. Unfortunately, Joanne and her mother, though, were drowned. And no one could really, and apparently at the time he's standing on the bridge when other people come along and they're trying to help these women. They're already dead by this point, but they're trying to help these people in the car. And he's just going, oh, look, it's probably because I jumped out of planes all the time. Not seeming bothered at all that his wife just died. So there had been some questions about that one back in the day, but there wasn't really that much evidence. So people had questioned it, but they didn't really do anything about it. Apparently the diver at the scene had said at that speed and short distance, it seemed unlikely that a man could get out of the car before it struck the water unless he was ready to get out of it. Yeah. More likely he was in the car as it entered the water and he swam out, leaving the wife and his mother-in-law to drown. And the other thing I read was that the car doors were all shut, but the driver's window was down.
Yeah, funny that.
And again, those terrible boating accidents I spoke about earlier were now viewed with suspicion. The sinking of the Duperrault, bad name for a boat, I reckon, looked fishy. One of Harvey's passengers on that trip reported, I remember we sailed around the wreck twice. Harvey said he was trying to read the markings on the buoy, or as they say in America, buoy.
Buoy.
But the former Commodore of the Capital Yacht Club, home berth of the Duperrault, said, everybody who has sailed those waters knows about the Texas and just stays away from her. The wreck is way off course. You have to work at it to find her. This is the one where he rammed his boat into the Texas. At the time, a federal court awarded Julian $14,258,000 damages for the loss of the Duperrault, which I can't remember what it is in today's money, but it was like 100 and something thousand. His other yawl, the Valiant, had also been sunk, and apparently he'd told friends that was definitely by him for the insurance money. He was also a pretty fickle husband, as I said before, telling all the exes at one time or another, I don't love you anymore, go get a divorce. Ethel, wife number one, not counting the annulled marriage before it, because it really wasn't a marriage because it got annulled, she said, I don't think I satisfied him. I don't think any woman could. He was very egotistical. He worried about himself. He weightlifted a lot. Said number three, Jitty, I don't know which wife I was. It wasn't like being married anyway. He was constantly interested in his body.
Ooh.
Finally, the fact that made the most sense out of all of his past was that he had taken a $20,000 double indemnity insurance policy out on Mary Deany 2 months before the Bluebelle massacre.
Oh.
He was massively in debt and being hassled by creditors, so this fact does look pretty bad, yeah. Whilst he had a slew of ex-wives, none of them thought he was capable of murder. I read one of them said something like, I never thought he'd kill me, but then again, he didn't insure me. The investigation ended with the conclusion that Julian had intended to kill his wife for the insurance money, but perhaps was witnessed by Arthur, and he had fingernail scratches and stuff on him, which suggested that she'd fought, and maybe Arthur had heard it, seen it happening, interjected, got
Where
murdered.
was Arthur found?
He wasn't.
Oh.
We don't know really what happened because all we know is what Terry Jo saw, and she didn't see her father, Mary Denny, or
But how do you know there were
Renee?
scratches then? I'm confused, right?
Julian had scratches on him.
Sorry,
after-
that makes it.
yeah.
Got it, right, yep, got it. To the Venice struggle, yep.
So he'd been fighting probably with his wife. This is the theory of what happened, and we will never really know. But yes, so the idea was that he had intended to kill her. He wanted to use having some people on board as a kind of inadvertent corroboration of his situation. So say he strangles her in their cabin, slips her overboard during the night and says, oh, she must have got up and she's disappeared. The other guests are like, where is she? Where is she? There was no sign of any problem between them prior to that, so why would anyone think that he'd murdered her? And he gets away with murder and he gets the insurance. But we think what maybe happened here was that part one of the plan didn't quite go according to that because she fought back, she might have made a noise. Arthur then got involved, possibly got killed.
Yeah.
Most likely in the front cabin that was the crew's cabin, which is partly why Terry Jo didn't see anything because they would have been away from everyone.
Right.
Then he comes, now he's in his kind of like, shit, I've got to get rid of everyone. He comes down, he stabs Brian. He stabs probably Jean first, then Brian. Because Brian, remember, was screaming out, Daddy, help me, Daddy.
Yeah.
Help me, Daddy, help me. And Daddy was probably already dead by this time, unfortunately.
Oh, my God.
We're not really sure about what happened with little Renee because she had a little bit of what could have been ante-mortem bruising, but not enough to suggest she drowned, right? So we know that she drowned. They did a post-mortem on her, but there wasn't enough sort of any physical evidence that suggested he'd hit her or anything like that. Possibly he just threw her in the water or she fell in the water in an altercation. She did have a life jacket on. She wasn't a strong swimmer. She was 7 years old. Or the other option is that he did actually pull her out and then drowned her when she was in the dinghy. We don't really know because he had to get rid of all of them. The weird thing is, and this is the question that a lot of people wonder, is why he didn't just outright kill Terry Jo, right? So because if he had gone out of his way to kill everyone else, why not her? There are 2 times, like with the rifle moment, and then, I said he looked like he went to get something while she's holding the rope for the dinghy. She drops it and then he just jumps in the water to get the dinghy. She definitely felt like he had looked at her and thought, I better clean up this. He turned to get a knife or something to smack her with and kill her. She dropped the rope and then that changed his mind and he just thought, I'll just leave her to let the ocean do it. And that's why he was quite shocked when obviously that she was found alive. So I think he was just really busy and just thought, oh, well, it'll just happen.
I can't do it all.
No.
Oh,
Other interesting facts
a lot
about
to
it.
me.
Yeah, I've got a lot going on, right, Pam?
Yeah. I can't do it all.
No.
Can anyone step up to the plate?
The other
Far out.
If you wouldn't mind killing yourself, Terry Jo, I'd appreciate it. Been pretty busy.
Do something for once.
And I just to stand there dropping the bloody rope on the dinghy. The other thing that was interesting was they weren't actually very far from a coastline where there was a lighthouse. The people in the lighthouse never saw any sign of a fire. They never noticed a boat burning in the distance, which they should have been able to see on that night. Similarly, he steered away from the lighthouse and away from there. I think that was east. He actually went west. And the idea, they thought that he probably wanted to put more time and distance between himself and the Bluebelle, A, making it hard for people to find the Bluebelle if they were going to, and B, also making it more sympathetic that he's floating around and he's been lost at sea and what have you. Mind you, as I said, he had the life raft on him, he had flares, he had food, he had water. He actually, in that time after whatever had happened and he was scuppering the boat and sinking the boat, he was throwing stuff so that he would survive. Terry Jo then goes off to live with her aunt and uncle, I think back in Wisconsin. And, she grew up with an extended family that loved her and there were a lot of people who looked out for her because they knew about this terrible situation. But being the 60s and no one really thinking about psychotherapy and stuff, they never talked about it. It was never mentioned. She didn't call her aunt and uncle mum and dad, but, like it was just sort of awkward. And she always felt like she was that girl, well, that's that girl who lost all, every room she went into. So she never spoke about what had happened beyond giving this testimony initially to the investigators. She went home. She never talked about it. They never talked about it. She changed her name to Terry when she was 12, which makes sense when you read it. Her name was originally Terry Jo with a Terry. She changed it to Tere and she dropped the Jo. The whole thing was to try and distance herself from this image of the poor sea orphan persona the media had given her.
She could have done a better job of changing her name just slightly.
I'm with you on that one.
Poor Terry.
So far, that's the bit of the story that's standing out for me.
She was only 12,
Yeah, it's a real
when
crime.
When she did that, she was only 12.
Absolutely.
Got bad advisors.
Well, the thing is, she walked up to her aunt and uncle and said, I'm changing my name to Terry. And I bet they were a bit like, okay.
Yeah, whatever. Sure.
Mm-hmm. They go, what?
What from Terry Jo?
You're doing what?
Yeah, all right, Terry Jo, Terry.
That's a big shift, Terry.
Well,
Terry
I think they probably appreciate it. They were like, thank God. Well, they were like, well, we don't have to work very hard to remember what it is now, so that's okay.
This double-barreled name's been doing our head in for 11 years, so thank God you're going back to one name.
She gets on with her life. She started to do radiology, but she found it a bit too upsetting because she'd have patients coming in and they had all the trauma, so she changed her degree, and she then went on to have a very successful career as a water management specialist. And she worked for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for over 14 years before retiring, and very much about conserving the coastlines and looking after the waterways. And she said things along the lines of, the water protected me and saved me, so I've dedicated my life to protecting the water.
Wow.
Give back.
As of 2023, Terry is 73 years old. She celebrated her 73rd birthday back on February 9th in 2023, so I'm guessing she's now 74. She also has legally changed her name, as I said, to Terry, and she married a couple of times.
That's a big part of the story to get my head around.
She's very happily married, I believe, with a blended family and grandkids, and is very grateful for her life. And she's married to a man who is a Fassbender. I don't think, did you say Michael?
Michael.
Yeah.
And
apparently not.
the book I quoted as a source, I actually left half of the title out on purpose so it wasn't a spoiler. But the book she wrote was, it's Alone, Orphaned in the Ocean, or Orphaned, something like that. Orphaned on the Ocean or something. So that would have given it away a little bit. And it's written by her and a bloke who she went to uni with, who has a PhD in soul survivors. So he's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and he does a lot of work around understanding the implications of being basically the only person in your family left to survive something like that.
Right.
And that, my friends, is the story of the Bluebelle massacre and the making of an orphan at sea.
Oh, poor Terry.
Wow.
Terry Jo.
Why haven't they made that into a movie, Terry Jo?
I don't know, they might have. I haven't seen it if they have.
I don't know where I've heard about it, but I have.
It's worthy of a movie.
Yeah.
And when you look into Julian, he actually came from really good upbringing. He had very wealthy parents, but then they lost everything in the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Because remember, he was born in 1927. But then they ship him off to live with his aunt and uncle or his grandparents, who lavished him with everything. He was a spoiled kid, actually. And he was very happy. There was no suggestion that he was unhappy with any of that, and he was doted on. And then, he went off. He was a male model at one point.
He just sounds like a bit of a player.
He tried to have his hand at a bit of door-to-door sales work.
Yeah.
He was a bit introverted. The first time he went up to the door, a woman answered the door and he ran away because he was scared. Kind of does put a scuppers, if you like, a sales career. But then he went off and he was doing a male model. I've seen photos of him and he's not that good looking in a contemporary sense, but I think, how Kirk Douglas was had a really fit body but a slightly strange face when he was young? You'd have to look him up.
Maybe.
He was very muscular looking.
I do.
But he wasn't hot
wasn't.
face, but he was all right.
Yeah.
This is what Julian was a bit like. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't an Adonis, but he had a very good physique, which definitely attracted the women. I will say that when he was in the forces, in the Air Force, he did quite well initially, and then he got to some point where he probably lost his bottle a bit, and I think it was at around 1952, and he was started to get known as the guy whose plane's engines would suddenly stop working and he'd have to fly back to base, or he actually ditched out of a couple of, that's how he got injured, was ditching out of a couple of planes. You know, at one point he fell on a piece of farm equipment or something and really quite badly injured himself. And he was picked up screaming, going, "Why does this always happen to me?" It's like, well, if you weren't, I don't believe he was a coward. I believe he had a bit of PTSD.
Yeah.
But if you weren't throwing yourself out of your plane, you might not have landed on some farm equipment.
His girlfriend wasn't in the plane at the time?
No, this is when he was in the Air Force with a co-pilot. It was all very Top Gun, but it had that feeling about Top Gun.
You know,
his wife, yeah. It was his
does he stink?
Second wife.
Slater, you stink.
You stink. That's right. So I think he was discharged in 58, and I do very much see things about him that might suggest that he was losing it. He was cracking up. He was really struggling. As he gets older, his wives do report that he's nastier. He becomes, and he starts to show a slightly, not so much a violent temper, but a nasty temper. And he'd have
I think you're being too kind to him.
Well, I'm just saying.
You're trying to find empathy where you don't need to.
I'm not empathising with him, but I struggled as I went through this story to understand what on earth happened on that night for everything to go so pear-shaped. And I suspect that what I'm saying is that this violent characteristic was building in him. He started to show these behaviours. I think his, fifth wife divorced him because he was unnecessarily cruel or something. It was mental cruelness, but he may have been physically violent towards her as well. So I just think it was coming. It wasn't there he wasn't necessarily born with these immediate behaviours, but I think they were built over time, whether it was caused by trauma, maybe brain damage. I don't know. You know, he fell out of a plane a couple of times.
Could have been all of the above, frankly.
And
it could have been all of that. And when things took a turn, or if he had a plan we don't know, but let's say he did kill his wife first and then someone else saw it, it's just one of those things that becomes something else to try and cover up that problem with that problem with that problem. Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to really know, I
think it's one thing to sink a boat for insurance. There's another to kill someone for insurance, though.
Yeah, that's right.
To me, the issue is if you get married once and it doesn't work out, no problem,
red flag.
Remarry. If that doesn't work out and you get married a third time, you know,
Look
are you
out.
Sure about that?
I'm
if you're
Tony's third
number
wife.
4,
yeah, I'm number 3
well,
for Tony.
if you're number 4 is the one I'm calling out, yeah. So you're okay.
Okay.
Should there be a next wife for Tony? She should run.
Red flag. Absolutely.
That's the problem.
Oh yeah, no, he was a shit husband for sure. Yeah, absolutely terrible. Not Tony. Carla.
You learn your lessons.
Someone just looked up at me like, "What?"
Tony,
I was like, "I'm talking about Julian, not Tony. He's a great husband."
I knew you were
Tony. Yeah.
Yes, we agree, but I do think we've discussed this a few times where there've been people who have gotten married, 5 or 6 times, and they've always been the problem in that no one gets married 5 or 6 times, and it's the 6th wife or the 6th husband who's the problem. It's always the person who is onto their 6th partner who is the problem.
Well, of course it is. But the wives also, he didn't seem to tell them about the old wives either. So it's one of them's like, I don't even know what number wife I was,
Not.
One of them thought she was his 2nd wife when she was his 5th wife, and he was
just a
bit of a bullshit artist.
So you need to get Tony tattooed with "I am Tony's 3rd wife, Caroline," so that wife number 4 will know. Just
put
in case.
a tattoo that says "wives" and then just have 3 lines under it.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Yeah.
Who's next?
Like tally marks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He would have had he would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would have been quite a nice tattoo, the 5 tally marks and another one, 6. He was really starting to get there with the tattoo.
The way the wives go was the first one, I don't know her name. She was a high school sweetheart. The parents managed to get that
No one
annulled.
ever does.
Well, that got annulled, and I think that's why her name is left out.
The parents got it annulled.
Yeah,
Her parents or his?
Probably both of them. I don't know.
Her parents.
2nd wife, or technically first legal wife, Ethel had a child by him, Julian Jr.
Oh.
Yeah. We don't hear about Julian very much.
About this.
Ethel is then told after he does a Spaten career or something, he comes out and says, I don't love you anymore, but you can keep the kid. She's like, cheers, thanks. So that's Ethel. Then the next one is Jitty. The next one's Joanne or Joan, the one who dies.
Who died, yeah.
And then the one after that is a girl called Jitty. That lasted 5 minutes. Then he's with Georgiana, and I think Georgiana had Lance, the child.
The one he would have killed but for insurance.
Possibly. And she divorced him because he was an asshole. At this point he had that, and she actually was co-owner or something of the Valiant with him, or the Torbatros. Like, so she'd been on the boat with him as well on one of those stupid name, on one of those two.
Torbatros.
And we don't know, I'm pretty sure he sunk the Valiant. Anyway, sold off another boat. No one could understand what was going on there. And then he ended up being this captain of the Bluebelle. But yeah, Georgiana had got rid of him, but she's the mother of Lance. And then they break up, and then he marries this poor girl, Mary Deany, her name is, and she ends up lost at sea. So, sentencing?
Gosh. I'm going to let Terry off for changing her name from Terry Jo to Terry
think
because
so.
of the trauma she went through.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's the obvious crime in this story.
Obviously, so there's no
But-
punishment for anyone. That's the only crime. The heck, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, that's the obvious crime, right? Because there's proof of that. That we all know exactly what's happened there. But she does get a free card because of what she went through. I actually do think, in all seriousness, she must be a remarkable woman. But what a remarkable child.
Yeah.
Being 11 and having the clarity of thought and the will to live the way she did. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So I love her lots. Him, I mean, where do you start? What have you done for this world, mate? 6 wives in, and you realise that that's where you've got to kill them if he hasn't already done that before, which it sounds like he has.
He may. Well, I don't know if he killed his second wife. He certainly didn't save his second wife, but I'm not sure that he did any of it on purpose. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
Just don't know.
well, I guess all I'm saying is
He
that
seemed happy enough to
at
divorce
6
them
he
all,
definitely
though. So,
did.
like, he didn't kill every wife. You know what I mean? Like, so you kind
well,
of think,
maybe
maybe he just really hated his mother-in-law.
maybe he divorced number 1, then thought he'd off number 2, but the heat got up a bit much, so he went back to divorcing them because he didn't do a very good job of that. I think he does need to die a slow death at sea in a raft.
Oh,
I know, that's what I was thinking. I know it's a
know.
bit obvious because I was thinking the same thing, and I was like, oh gosh, I need to be more.
Yeah.
It's just too easy not to put him in the situation that she was in, but leave him out there for longer, and I don't know.
I'm surprised
Have more
at
things
you,
go past.
Swanee. I'm surprised at you.
Why?
Yeah, that's not your
Think
that's
about
not your
what was
vibe
important to him.
normally.
The money?
His looks.
Just his
Oh,
looks?
he was a massive narcissist.
Well, I think if you-
Yeah. It was all about being able
Well,
to
there's that
attract
tr- that is
women,
true.
use women, his fit body, his curly blonde hair and blue eyes, and he really traded off it. I'm surprised that you haven't just scarred him.
I don't think I'd got that far. I was trying to work out how I wanted to incorporate him being like at sea and feeling like he was being passed over by passing planes, boats and whatever else for a prolonged period of time, so close, but he was just invisible, and the suffering would go on, and he was just, but I hadn't got as far as disfiguring him as
That's
well.
why he's
But,
invisible,
you know,
because we disfigured
sure.
him.
If
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. I mean,
he was in that pool toy that Terry Jo was in,
yeah.
and sharks came along and bit his
Nibbled at
legs
his bum.
and his arms
Oh.
off, but he survived. But we had to change his name to Bob because that's what
Yeah.
he did when he was in water. Maybe that's a better punishment.
My only fear with that, if he was considered a hero, remember he was considered a hero before this happened. If there was any doubt what had occurred before that, let's say he survived and he did lose his arms and legs, whatever else, and he was called Bob, and they still thought, oh, what a hero! We can't have that even possibly come into the
Yeah.
equation. He needs to be.
What if he was never
it needs
found?
to be known what he did. No, I think it would be preferred if he wasn't able to commit suicide
Was found,
and he had to
but shamed.
face the yes. I think that would be shamed and lose his
Yeah,
looks.
that's-
What are you doing,
I'm
Schmidty?
going to sentence our mate Julian to spend the rest of his time, yes, can't kill himself, but I think he needs to hang out with Billy Zane, or at least Billy Zane's character in Dead Calm, on that sinky, leaky boat that never gets fixed, with just this psychopath who, at any moment is probably going to try and kill you and frighten you, and that could be his perpetual punishment. That's my sentence.
I was thinking like if someone like him being at sea would be where he'd want to be. So I would like to have something where he was unable to go. Maybe he became chronically seasick as well, so that he couldn't even bear to be on the water, because that's obviously he's had a love affair with it. Having people who like that kind of stuff always do like doing that. So he can't go anywhere near the water. He needs to have some kind of landlocked misery. I don't know what landlubber is it?
Landlubber. Maybe put him in the bayou then, where he left his wife. All right. Well, thank you for joining me on that little adventure on the high seas. Now you know a little bit more about Below Deck also, so I'm sure you are going to get out on Hey You or Netflix or Foxtel and start watching.
You know, I can't wait.
And as we say, I was waiting for that. And as we say every week, miss you already. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao, darling.
Thanks for listening to Trial by Wine. You can contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Please rate, review and subscribe to Trial by Wine on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com, Trial by Wine, or visit our website www.trialbywine.com to donate to us. Your support will help us cover many more cases and apply wacky sentences. We really appreciate you listening and hope you tell everyone about us. Our cover art is by John Christo and music is by Beauchamp from pixabay.com.